right. Don't get all quiet now. Come on.
That's the awkward phase. Megan, I've seen a lot of interviews with you when people ask you about the evil nature of Catherine de Medici, but she's not really evil, she's more complex. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. I never saw her as evil at all. I saw her, she makes maybe some questionable choices, for sure. She was such a fantastic character to play. I just felt so lucky to cross paths and to have been in that world of Rain. It was just an absolute blast. And like all good characters, she's multifaceted, she's multidimensional, and she's flawed. She has character defects that makes a character much more interesting to play. And as I always would say about her, she was in that time, a woman in that time, she didn't really have the ownership of her power. And literally, she also didn't have a title. She was came from a merchant family, the Medicis, so she really found her head quite literally on the chopping block several times in her life because she could be replaced. She had no value. Her value was in producing offspring, children that she could then populate the monarchies of Europe with. And so that's a pretty terrifying position to be in. And for many years, she was not able to have children. And then she really was. They were going to get rid of her. Mm-hmm. And she threw herself at the feet of her husband's father, who had taken pity on her, and basically said she would clean his floors. She'd do anything, please did not dispose of her. And he didn't. He kept her around, even though her husband had a mistress, and which was very true, and we've sort of played this in the show, who he was very much in love with, an older woman by the name of Diane de Poitiers. And so Catherine really was always in the shadow of a lot of things, and she was fiercely, fiercely loyal to her family. Made obviously some and it was very dark times. Mm-hmm. The reality of the politics of the times and the fights between the Protestants and the Catholics and Rome having really the power. So I just loved playing her because she was, that thing they say, hurt people, I think would apply to a character like Catherine, because she also really had to put survival above everything else.
It sounds like there's a tremendous amount of research that had to go into preparing for this role. Can you talk a little bit about that?
There was, and then there was only up to a point, because obviously with Rain, we took a tremendous amount of liberties. Mm-hmm. So anyone who's a historical, don't hurt me. So we were really in our own universe with that. But it was amazing to read up about her. Obviously, a very highly intelligent woman, very creative, a huge patron of the arts. And we sort of played with that a little bit in Rain. Mm-hmm. But she really was very sophisticated. Brought in all kinds of, introduced all kinds of things like the fork, which they didn't have before. And perfumes was another huge thing of hers, and just art. She was a very well-educated person. And what I loved about her too, and obviously I have a history of somewhat playing characters like this with Anne, she was not someone who was a traditional beauty. And so she was in fact really, and Catherine was really considered not that, and people could be quite cruel about that. So she was definitely trying to maintain her position in a pretty harsh world.
Wow. What is the source of Catherine's power?
Well, there would be a couple things. She did come from a family that was very wealthy, because they were merchant family, the Medicis, and there was a series also about the Medicis. So that whole period of time in Italy and the Papal States and all of the money and merchants was kind of fascinating, because that was a new way of there being power, that it wasn't just related to a feudal system and to a monarchy. Obviously, the Pope had a lot of power, right. So she got her power through that and through her own intelligence and her wits and her need to survive.
about cast dynamics, you bring a lot of experience and a lot of responsibility to this show. And I'm thinking, do you sometimes feel like you're in charge, or do the other characters look up to you in that sort of a mother role, for real?
Well, I was certainly one of the oldest people on Rain. So perhaps maybe age gave me a little bit of respect, perhaps. And such a great group of young actors to work with. I have to say, we were just, Toby Regbo was just incredible, Anna Popplewell, Adelaide Kane, Torrance Coombs. They were all really just great-spirited.
Right.
We had, this sort of, a combination. We had a lot of people that were either from Britain, Canada, a few Australians, and then a small number of Americans. And so it really had a wonderful international sense, and people who just really came and wanted to come to work and do the work.
Can we get a little excited about the sci-fi announcement with regards to Winona Earp? I mean, you're playing... yeah, exactly. Right. Can I get some of that? That's fantastic.
Nice. Yeah.
How's motherhood going to differ for Michelle from Catherine?
Well, Michelle, it's going to differ because that is a whole new universe to me. So for you Earpers, you know that it's, I'm still learning the rules of that world that I come to work on. Okay, sorry. So the Revenant, okay, wait a minute. Okay, so the portal, wait a minute. What's happening? If I go through the triangle, okay, what's happening? So I too am in a new universe. But Mama Earp is she's a rodeo queen, so I love that. There is a common theme there. She's a queen in her own right. But she's been through some stuff. She's been kind of being re-released into the world. She's also fiercely loyal and protective of her daughters, but she has some fiery daughters too, so that's fun for me to play as well.
Yeah, and that's just such a fantastic show with such powerful, strong women in charge. And it's sort of the same theme with Catherine de Medici. You have women in charge again. But how do you make the transition from that universe to the supernatural universe?
You just jump in. You just jump in wholeheartedly. And I think that's what's so exciting, and obviously for people who are big fans of certain genres, is that there are... You just make these worlds real. They have their own rules, and then once you just accept those rules, and oftentimes those rules are sort of a wonderful metaphor for other situations we're dealing with in more down-to-earth, practical situations. They're sort of worded so beautifully. They're put in a way that actually makes us address issues perhaps that we would be too afraid to look at if we were doing them more reflective of our society.
Speaking of issues that we were afraid to look at, Mitch Pileggi yesterday and I were talking about your appearance on X-Files.
Oh my God. Yes.
You want to take us back to that moment?
It's you'd almost miss it if you blinked. Well, that'll be my first thing I'll say about that, because yes, I did give birth to an alien on the X-Files. So it was really just a matter of time that I got back to this universe. Yeah.
The time period that you would prefer to work in, would it be the 15th or the 21st century with a supernatural six-gun?
I just love a good story and a good character. So I love playing all time periods. I really do. I mean, what was incredible about Rain was our costumes.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that was you really put something on that took, you'd come in the morning. It was a 2-hour process between makeup and hair, and wardrobe alone could take you 20 minutes or more by the time you had the layers on and the. But I mean, there's actors, and I really take my hat off, who do have to do a lot of prosthetics. And I have never had to do that in terms of sci-fi. That is a whole other, that takes hours. That's having to live with something on your body. So I've been very lucky that my things have been more the clothes that I've worn and kind of just embracing times.
Well, they managed to make you look so regal and majestic. Like you get some fantastic costumery.
How is that possible? What is this?
If you had a production, like you have over 90 credits, I think, on IMDb. If you had a production that you could name drop at a party, that would be your favorite. What would it be?
I guess it depends on what I wanted at the party. And he was at the party. Well, there's no doubt that Catherine had my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine definitely, especially being a mother myself, having been married and divorced, having gone through certain things in life, I had a lot of. I loved playing Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, I feel incredibly grateful for my relationship with Anne.
Mm-hmm.
And then that sort of ends up being kind of a very personal one, and she's unique and for her own reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the theater, there would be roles that I played in the theater. I loved playing in the Penelopiad,
Mm-hmm.
playing Margaret Atwood's lead heroine in the Penelopiad was a great piece. And I really loved Juliet and Romeo and Juliet, I have to say. It's pretty extraordinary. Being on that Stratford stage, being in that world that's like a womb. That's a very sacred space. I do love the theater. And I loved Carol Churchill's Top Girls was another piece that I did. So that was an interesting piece for me.
And
you did just ask for one, but I don't know.
I know, it's just,
I'm sorry.
I was thinking you might mention your directorial debut in
Oh, well, I
2014.
hadn't gotten there yet.
Oh, yeah.
I was just on the acting side, yeah.
What's your favorite moment in Rain?
Gosh, there was a lot. I did love the one where Adelaide and I kind of went on the road together, and we had to pretend we were commoners,
yes, right, yes.
because somebody was pretending, because we were afraid we'd be seen. It was like this very strange little episode. We were sort of a side trip. We went, and that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I twisted my ankle, and I was eating chicken, and I was ravenous, and so it was sort of fun to show Catherine, like being able to be less aware or concerned about how people were perceiving her, because she was coming off like a peasant. But that was a lot of fun.
You have some dry comedic moments that are just fantastically delivered.
Yeah.
Particularly the one I enjoy when you turn and look and say, we'll prepare to do what when you're on the road and you're disguised as commoners,
Right.
and there's that moment where I'm not prepared to clean, and it's just a fantastic thing. How do you manage to convey that type of comedy? It's so effortlessly.
Well, she was, again, it was such fun, and I think also working in the theater, and I had done the Penelopiad. I'd done for 2 years in a row, 2 seasons of playing this role, playing Queen Penelope, in this piece that I'm actually going to be directing a production of in London at the Grand. We're going to be doing the Penelopiad, and I'm going to be directing it. And because I can't help it, I'm cheeky. If I can get a laugh, I'm going to try. If I can make you cry and get a laugh, even better. I'm going to go for both, yeah.
Well, I think at this point I'd like to turn the time over to your fans,
All right.
and let's take some questions. And if we can keep them really sharp and to the point, folks, so we can extend the opportunity to other folks, that would be great. And we have a question at the back there. Yes?
Oh, okay, we're going to have to speak. We don't have a microphone.
What's your favorite part
of being Anne?
My favorite part of being Anne was probably smashing that slate.
Oh, poor Gilbert.
Was that she lost her temper. That's what I loved Anne's temper. And then she always was then having to backpedal and smooth it over with something, and she was clever enough to do that. But at first, her first impulse was to, yeah.
Right in front here, yes.
So talking about the slate, how many times did you have to smash it on his head?
You know, we didn't have the luxury of a lot of takes back then. I would say, I think 2 sticks in mind, I remember. And we may have used the first one because Johnny was so great. He was such a great soul. Yeah.
Yes, right here.
So you are Anne, and you've done Bookie, and you've also been connected with Murdoch Mysteries. Is there any other book series that you would be interested in being involved with to go
Oh, I'm sure there are that are series. I'd have to think about that. I'd have to think about that. Nothing that I can think of that jumps right to mind. But if you have a thought or a suggestion, I'm open to hearing it. What's that?
Any single books?
Well, interestingly enough, this show that I'm directed is based on a book called Held. It's a young adult novel, and it's about a young woman who's abducted, and then it's about Stockholm Syndrome, and we're part of the IPF competition. So anybody who can click on, I think it's under hashtag HELD, H-E-L-D, they can see a 2-minute trailer that I directed for this piece, which I'm excited about. So that will hopefully, if we win the competition, or we will be going ahead and doing that this summer.
Awesome. I think we had a question, Ryan, second row.
Hi, we're kind of living in a bit of an Anne renaissance right now.
Yeah.
Have you gotten a chance to see the new see Netflix Anne series? And if you have, what do you think of that different portrayal of Anne?
I have not seen, I've only seen parts of it because before it came out, I would see bits of trailers and moments of it. And it looks beautiful. I think the young actress is doing an amazing job. So I've heard that it's people are very excited about that as well. And it has its own feel, I think, for an interpretation for this generation. So I can't speak to a comparison because I haven't seen it really to do that. And I wouldn't anyway, because what I think of Anne is a classical character in a canon of characters. So especially coming and working in the theater, there's not, oftentimes there's not a definitive Lear, there's not a definitive Juliet there. You get very lucky as actors to be graced by co-inhabiting a character, and you may feel very possessive about it because it has a special meaning, but you do pass a torch because, especially with a role like Anne and for young women, there haven't always been very many. There were a lot more young male roles, but, especially even for me when I started out. I didn't realize how rare she was.
Yes, right over here. Yes.
So you may not think that you're the definitive Anne, but to me you always will
Yes.
be.
Thank you.
Characters, me, and to women in my life and my family. And why do you think she's so relevant still today, almost 100 years after her creation?
That's a good question.
Because she's not defined by anyone other than herself, meaning, and I think that's rare, again, she wasn't the girlfriend of, or the sister of, or the daughter of, and the structure of the story was such, because she was an orphan, she really came she had to create her whole new world in her life. So I think for a lot of young people, and particularly for young girls, this was such a revelation to see a character that also was considered homely, which was an old-fashioned word for ugly at times. She was weird, and she was not of a social economic background that gave her any value. She was considered trash. And in spite of that, she had this innate really born out of survival. Her survival tactics were to embrace the world and see beauty and love, and not to go to cynicism and destruction. So I think for a lot of people, male, female, young, old, it's still such a beautiful message of hope. And that these two elderly mentors, in a way, even without knowing it, come into her life. And they offer something to each other, which is a sense of belonging and love. And they're all a bit of outcasts. And this space is created for something. So it's a timeless story. And I think the more we learn about Lucy Maud and her own struggles with depression and her own deep and difficult struggles to get her work recognized. The book was rejected over and over again. She was told, shut up, get married, who are you? And I don't know, I can't really say this, but perhaps she was, I don't know if she was truly happy in her marriage, or in another world or time she would have had permission to have been another soul and had expression and loved other people. That was not open to her. And so she wrote that book because loving nature and loving literature and language saved her life. And how many people have come up to me and have said, I'm a teacher today because I saw that story. I read those books and I wanted to be of service to people. That is that is all attributed to Lucy Maud Montgomery. So she's really who gets the honors there. I hope that answers your question.
Wow, that's great. I think you had a question, didn't you? Yes. Yeah.
What was the main reason you decided to take your role on Winona O'Hare?
Oh, because I got to work. I got to work because I love working. I'd met Emily, actually, Andres, at Dragon Con, and we were talking, and I said, I would love to direct. And she was thinking, I'd like to get you in there first as an actor. So this opportunity came up, and it's such a fun, great character. And again, there's room for some humor and playfulness, which I love.
I think there was a question here.
You've played a lot of characters that are powerful in their own right, and in the Stork Derby and Rain.
Yeah.
Are there any genres or characters that you've not had a chance to play yet that you'd really like to get a chance to play?
I'm sure the answer is yes, especially in terms of genres and certain things, which are newer worlds to me. I like all characters. Sometimes it's interesting. I just don't. I think no actor does. When characters are written well, whether they're strong or whether they're actually weak. That's a judgment, but whatever, it's just wonderful to play. So I'm open to playing anything if it's multidimensional.
I think there was a question on the end here earlier. Was there a hand? No? All right, let's go with this gentleman.
So you spoke earlier about playing the legacy character of Anne and passing the torch, so to speak. Have you actually ever had one of those actual moments where you met someone else who's played the role and actually had that pass the torch type discussion?
Well, it's funny. I actually had met in Prince Edward Island a number of years ago an actress who was playing Anne in the musical. I went to see I was invited to see at Charlottetown, and I have tremendous respect for actors who can sing and dance. Those are the triple threats, as we say, and that is something that I do not do. So I'm a single threat, not a triple threat. And I was very, and I met her, and really, and she was very gracious and generous and very nervous. And I thought, no, and it meant, and her work in that role and that thing meant a lot to her. That was her world and her ownership of that. So we were able to share that.
I think this young lady in the back has another question.
Yes, it was hard to get the role of Anne. I was one of the first people to audition, and then they went across the country on a sort of a nationwide search, and I was about the 3,000th girl at the end. They came back around, so I had to fight for it. It was about a year's journey, and they hadn't found. And I will say that at that time they had to put a Canadian in the role. It was part of the tax funding. It was the way the CBC, it was the way it was going down, and that worked in my favor because there was the director had someone else that he wanted, and she was American. So I will be forever grateful for us protecting our actors and putting them in that role.
And
Yeah, exactly.
yes. I think there was a question right here.
I was wondering if you could talk about your working relationship and just relationship in general with Colleen Dewhurst.
Oh, what a, I like to say a great broad of the theater, She was also the president of the Actors Equity Union for years in New York. Just an incredible, strong, funny, professional woman. And it was a great joy and a great mentor, someone to watch work, someone the way they behaved and how they treated everyone on set. No games being played there, no arrogance. Someone who, again, came from a background of the theater, so oftentimes you work hard in the theater and you don't get paid very often, and everyone's up there and you need everyone to have your back. And so she was just a really gracious and an extraordinary woman. Yeah.
Right here in front.
Sorry, did you go to drama school when you were kids?
I did not go to drama school when I was a kid, but I grew up, my parents, my father is passed now, but my parents were actors, and my mother still is. So I grew up seeing a lot of theater, and as a kid we would spend times at the Stratford Festival in the summers, or Theatre New Brunswick, in Barrie, all like around the Neptune in Halifax. So I sort of, for me, I didn't feel, and I think if people want to, I think it's fantastic, and I think there's a lot of, my brother went to the Juilliard, so he did end up going. But I was already working, and I just kept working. And then my school, I sort of learned my school was working.
Thank you.
Oh, right in the back there.
What do you prefer, like live theater, TV shows, or movies?
I love them all. I don't, and I like going back and forth because I think each one continues to make me grow and be a better performer and a better artist. Sometimes just working on things in the theater, the texts, just to be frank, the writing is better. The texts are deeply complicated. If you're doing Shakespeare or Chekhov or any number of things, you're always going to be working with material that's smarter, better, and bigger than you are. So you have a lot to strive for. And so in terms of habits and thought processes, there's just a lot of value in that. And having said that, the camera doesn't really ever lie. So the camera's a very interesting, I was going to say lover. It sees you, I love being in front of a camera, and I just think it has its own energy. And so my favorite performers are the ones where I feel like that there's just an authenticity and an energy that the camera has its own reality with.
Do you ever get people coming up to you and telling you their own Anne performance stories that they've been in the musical themselves?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, I've had some of those, which is great. Yeah.
I was actually the
Were you
Eagles-
Anne? Did you ever play Anne? Come
I was
on,
actually-
Come on.
I
Who
never
else
got
here
never
played
got the
Anne?
role.
Whoever played Anne out here?
There's got to be. I wound up getting the role of the evil school teacher. I was Mr. Phillips,
Oh, nice.
and I apparently made children cry. So it must be a gift. I have no idea.
Did you send Anne to the board and make her write?
Well,
Did she have to write on the board when Mr. Phillips?
When I did my audition, I came in and I actually scared the 6-year-olds that they had on the stage, and so they said that was the person that they wanted. So since then, I've learned. But I think there was a question right over here.
Oh, after you played Anne, did you find it difficult to do different types of roles? Did you find you were typecasting?
It's funny. I found a little bit of both, but more frustratingly here in Canada than I would say in the States. And I found that was something that I appreciate. I think that Quebec and I think the United States have a different relationship with a sort of a star system and an understanding of building on that and building on an audience's attachment and love of something, and not not saying, oh, you're this, you're not that. Actors go through that a lot sometimes, and really it can also be a testament to having done something well. So you take it with a bit of oh shit, I must have done that really well. But I was very young too, and I have found, because of my parents' background and being in the theater, I have always said this, that my profession is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So I'm in it for the long haul. There are ups and downs, there are dry seasons, there are times when you're appreciated, there are times when you feel like you couldn't get arrested. And it's just, you do it, you better love it, if you're gonna be in it.
I think this young lady had another question.
I was 15, I think.
Yes, over here.
Did you have a favorite Anne moment, whether it was Gilbert or Marilla?
I mean, I probably had some with Colleen because I would love it if she couldn't remember her lines. Sometimes she couldn't remember a character's name. Sometimes she would just start making up words and calling people things just to keep the scene going. So it would be like, Mr. Bumper, Bummer, Badunner, whatever your name. Like she would just make you laugh because she was. I love, and I'll never forget with Jonathan, we were joking about spelling chrysanthemum, and then he would be picking up. We were waiting outside, and he was picking up different flowers and pretending they were trying to spell the names of Queen's Anne lace. But he had a wicked sense of humor too, Johnny. He was really a very talented and greatly missed.
I think we had a question right here.
Is there anything you can tell us about your times on the Mountain Journey?
Oh, on the Wilderness Trail. Boy, yeah, I can tell. I loved that as a kid. This sort of speaks to before we had a lot of child labor laws in this country. Because I used to go to work. I didn't have a guardian with me. My parents were both working, I think, at the time, so someone in the office kind of looked out for me. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And I would go work my 10 hours at least a day, 10 to 12 hours a day. Having said that, I loved it. And the Kleinberg Studios, this is before Canada's Wonderland. I remember seeing Canada's Wonderland being built, kind of in the distance it was coming up. But I would go off at lunch, and the wranglers, the people that would be in charge of the horses, they would just put me on a horse, and at lunch hour I'd just take off with these young male wranglers, and they were teaching me how to ride. I was 11 years old, and I was very, very lucky because the people I think had a lot of respect for my parents, and nobody ever crossed a line with me. I had a lot of people who were looking out for me, which is not always the case, and I've worked with young actors who were not as fortunate. Nobody, excuse my language, I'm going to swear, fucked with me around. They did not mess with me. That is not always the case, and people need to be protected when they're working, when they're young. I was very, very, I was very lucky.
Right over here.
I was just wondering if you knew what they had planned for the next season of Reign, the show.
Oh, well, I think so. I mean, we got basically learned the rug was being pulled out from under us when we were halfway through that last episode. We thought they kept us waiting. They just weren't sure if they were going to do it. I think we would have at least had one more season, and they would have taken more time towards, obviously, Mary on the chopping block. But what they were going to do, I think, in France was a bit of that wonderful, not wonderful because historically it was terrible, but basically St. Bartholomew's Massacre, which was Princess Margot was going to come back, which I picked her up at the convent at the end of the thing. And basically it was where they married her off and had, it's in Game of Thrones, it's what the Red Wedding was based on. And it was based on because my understanding is that I believe they married Margot to a Protestant. They allowed for it. And it really became a trick where all key Protestant figures were led to the celebrations, and then Catherine behind the scenes and swooped in and they murdered all of the opposing forces who were the Protestants. So it was used. So that's what we were leading up to on my side, which would have been fun to play but not to have lived through. So please.
I think we've got a question there.
What actors do I admire, and in terms of admire, what are their traits? Their careers. The more I'm in this business, I admire a lot of actors who just keep going. And I admire actors for a lot of different reasons. I admire, who do I admire? I admire a lot of people. I don't even know. I've always admired actors that also sort of are have multidiscipline, and I do admire actors that can sing and dance. That I cannot do that. So I don't actually have a favorite actor, I have to say. I mean, it's always so fun. Like, I loved the young man in Call Me By Your Name. I thought his performance was unbelievable, and he was also fabulous in Lady Bird. And I can't even pronounce her name, from Lady Bird, I think. Yeah, and Saoirse Ronan is, I think, she's very exciting. I love the actor, the lead of Get Out. I thought his performance. I was hoping he was going to win the Academy Award. I thought he was brilliant. And I've always been a Gary Oldman fan. I think, I always admired. As I said, I could go on and on. I don't really have a favorite.
I think we had 2 questions here. So there's this lady here, yes?
Which character in Anne of Green Gables do you feel like you had a special connection with, with the exception of Anne?
Well, I loved Richard Farnsworth, too, who played Matthew. Definitely Colleen. And I had a lot of fun with Skylar Grant, who played Diana. Yeah.
Yes, there was one right here.
Okay, again, happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
Oh.
And I'm a huge Anne of Green Gables fan. I read the books. I grew up reading the books. The continuing story.
Yes. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
Uh-oh.
Why?
Just why?
There's always the dangerous ones.
Yes. Not nothing. Well, because we did, I didn't do the series, Road to Avonlea. And basically, when they decided to do the third one, they were sort of picking up where they had gone through their whole series, which had really had a life of its own in terms of, so whether they would have originally have done that with the character that Sarah Polley played, and they decided to put Anne into that, and it was fun. I will say that we went through a lot. It was written one way and then sort of took on a life of its own as a piece, and that was a strange journey to be a part of. But again, fun. If you take Anne of Green Gables out of it, and you took it in its own thing as a character. And this young woman who wants to be a reporter, and then there's the war and all of this. It had its own thing, but it had, you're correct, nothing to do. But you can talk to Mr. Sullivan about that.
I think we had a question right here.
As someone who's been in the business as long as you have from a young age, what changes have you seen for women in the industry?
Well, obviously we're in an interesting time right now, and I think we're finally recognizing that there has to be measures put in place to just get the equal opportunity factor up. And I think recently I just saw, which was just shocking again, that Claire Foy was not paid as much as in that. Now, the only thing that is true, he had a different history and he had a background, so he had, and some of those things do establish your, how much money you get paid, because you've been on a show and you can say, no, actually I can do this, and that is a negotiating thing in that instance, so I can't really speak to that, but I did think, woo. We obviously have a long way to go in many ways, in all, not just gender, but racial equality, gender equality. But we're having a conversation and things are shifting. I think for me, as a woman who's getting older, what is also exciting for me to see, and I think we still need much more of it in this country. Other countries are far better at that. Britain has always been better at putting women of age on television. And older women not only are the leads of things, they have boyfriends, they have love affairs. You actually see them kiss people. They have a whole life that we tend to not want to do with people. We tend to keep aging things down for women. We don't do that. We do that sometimes for men, but we do it more for women. So we still have a ways to go to just, I think, grow up and actually make our work inclusive of our culture and our audience and our people and our stories. But there's a conversation happening about it, and I think that's a beginning point. And some of that has to be regulated. You know, sometimes this must now be done by 50% by. They're going to have to do some of that because those doors have just historically been closed. And so it's not enough just to say, what a grand idea. Well, you don't have to go back very far to see that, you know, there was a time when women didn't even have the right to vote. That's not that long ago. So we just have to keep moving forward and having constructive conversations about that. And there's so many talented people, and that's exciting too. That those doors, and there's more platforms to see things. There's a lot more material to produce because people are consuming it so fast. So that's exciting as well. So demand it. That's the other line. You're the power. Ask for it. Ask to see your stories being told and your voices to be represented. Let's do that for you guys.
I think we have time for a couple of more questions. Right in the back over there. That would be you, yes.
I have adored you from the very beginning, from the start of, even before Anne of Green Gables. But I tell you that you being Anne of Green Gables, that is like, my fellow comparison, that will be the most amazing thing to me. It has been the source of the books, not the source of things regarding Anne of Green Gables. But I really was intrigued when you took on the role of Catherine de Medici. What made you choose that role?
Sometimes I find that roles choose me. Sometimes it's, there are many things. I auditioned for Reign, and I had just come from doing this production of Margaret Atwood's play, The Penelopiad, and Catherine in the original pilot was smaller, and but I just loved playing a queen, and I loved finding some humor, and the network started to respond to that. And really, we had a female showrunner who was in her mid-50s, who had a show about a lot of young women and had one woman of an age in there, and I think she really responded to that, as did the other writers in the room. So I was very lucky again, but luck was meeting with me, suiting up and showing up and bringing something to that character and loving it. And I just loved, I mean, it's such a great, you're playing a queen whose husband has a mistress that he's more in love with than you, and it's already, the stakes are already through the roof, you know. Dinners at the table would be very tense in that household. That makes for great drama.
And I think we need to finish it off with this young lady again, who's got the cutest questions.
Yeah. How many movies or shows have I acted in? I'm not even sure. I mean, there are certainly, I don't know how many.
IMDb says 90.
I guess IMDb says 90 plus. So maybe that. And there's people who've done a lot more. I think I've been very fortunate to have crossed paths with certain roles that have made a big impact and that I've really enjoyed doing. So not every role has been that, but the ones that have been have really made it, have made me be able to have a connection with all of you, which is fantastic. And we don't act in a bubble or a vacuum. We act for you guys. We want to entertain and share stories and be a part of this, and some people will like some things better than others, but that's really what it's about, is being storytellers. And as I direct as well, I want my work to be something that touches people can interact with and have a relationship to. That's what I love to do.
Megan, thank you so very much for sharing your time with us. I know we've all immensely enjoyed ourselves. A big hand, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for watching the Convention Junkies coverage of the 2018 Toronto ComiCon. Please like, comment and subscribe to see more. If you would like to help us with future projects, please visit our Patreon page.